Arsenal 3, Manchester United 1. It was a brilliant game, and in today's video we're going to tactically break down the game and explain how the game shifted at various points, the momentum changed from one side to the other, where Manchester United and Erik Ten Hag actually go from here with the arrivals of Sofyan Amrabat, Rasmus Højlund, but also why Arsenal are operating at what I would like to say at around 65% of their actual level right now. But let's start, and I'm going to begin with the first half, and it was a conservative first half, first 45 minutes for both sides, but for differing reasons. Arteta set up Arsenal to initially press in a man-to-man system, with the wingers Saka and Martinelli inverting to allow Ben White and Oleksandr Zinchenko to press through onto their opposing men in an aggressive press. And at times, they did do this successfully, ironically, for Manchester United's first goal. But this was only sporadic. Why was that? Well, Martinez, Lindelof, Eriksen, but especially Andre Onana had a large part to say in this. There's not many people, not even goalkeepers, but players in world football, quite like Onana, who can beckon on a press. And when you have these tenacious shadow markers in Ødegaard and Nketiah, the way Onana beckoned on the Arsenal press meant that as soon as Arsenal bit and triggered, left their block shape to go and press Onana on the ball, left their man-man shape, there became a free man, and Onana either found them directly or with a deep midfielder dropping in, whether that was Casemiro or Eriksen, there was a nice combination to release the spare man. And this meant that Arsenal wingers couldn't invert reliably, and this shifted them into a much more passive block because of this free man that was created by Onana in attack. And this meant that Ødegaard was largely shadow marking Christian Eriksen, Havertz on Casemiro, Martinelli dropping much deeper, and this is why most of the build-up occurred on Manchester United's right-hand side. But this links to their continued issues in actually progressing play. And although not an optimal approach from an Arteta point of view, Arsenal were largely happy to allow Manchester United to do this in the first half. Because overall it was possession, certainly. Manchester United ended the first half with over 50% of it, but it was possession without any control, and it's one of the few times you'll actually hear me saying that. They disrupted, certainly, the expected flow of the game and made it more difficult for Arsenal, but they didn't control, really, that Arsenal press or pose enough of a threat. I'm going to explain why now. In Erik Ten Hag's sort of fluid 3-2 or 3-3 build-up structure that we've talked a lot about on this channel, it's a top-notch, world-class structure, with the rotations and the constant zones occupied by his players, whether he promotes a centre-back, inverts a fullback, a second phase player drops deeper. But it's the progression through the lines, and this comes down to the profiles and players he has within that system. That's what has always hampered Manchester United building up from the back. Onana obviously becomes that +1 now, and this allows Dalot and Wan-Bissaka, as it was, to push higher. But there was nothing centrally through Arsenal's compact block, and finding Rashford over the top can be great at times, but with no Rasmus Højlund outball to deal with sort of the clever pressing from Arsenal, and that's a big part of what he will bring. Rashford really needs those sort of combinations, either to find Bruno Fernandes in between the lines or a 9 dropping a bit deeper to then unleash Marcus Rashford. Højlund is the only direct ball-to-feet man in the forward line at Manchester United Football Club. And of course, Amrabat will help this central progression as well. He dominates that first and second phase. And although he can't sort of turn fluidly out of tight areas, he uses his body really well to shield and then platform attacks. So he's just as hard to dispossess. He switches and moves a sort of compact block that Arsenal were around and suits that central centre-back role, dropping in United's sort of fluid build-up shapes, and has that balance of progression and conservativeness that United don't have other than Onana and maybe Martinez across their whole squad. But let's now look at Arsenal's build-up. And before moving on to why the second half was more controlled, let's look at the first half. United began the game in an aggressive man-to-man press, as I think we expected. Again, though, for Ten Hag, it was without his fullbacks joining the press, like sort of the other elite sides, if you will, do. But that wasn't as important here. Arsenal built in a 4-2 shape, really, and Havertz was forced to join Rice in the pivot at times, and this sort of 4-2 shape with the left interior or the left winger drifting centrally into the pivot is something we've seen against Barcelona in pre-season with Leandro Trossard dropping in next to Thomas Partey. The difference here, though, is that it's Kai Havertz, as I'm going to get onto, and that meant most of the time, as Ramsdale, sometimes formed that nominal left centre-back role in possession, that allowed Havertz to start slightly higher up and not always have that responsibility in the pivot with Declan Rice, who largely dominated sort of the progression and took on the build-up phase for Arsenal, that mantle on his own, forming a 4-1 shape, of course allowing Kai Havertz to drift higher. And the structure that Arteta has created is so good that at times, sort of Havertz having to drop deeper and play, although it wasn't planned, as deep as we've seen him in an Arsenal shirt, it didn't matter as much. But of course, I'll go back to the word optimal. This wasn't optimal, and Arsenal didn't exert the control that they wanted on the game. And in tandem with United's very tentative but competent holding onto the ball in their own first phase, Zinchenko couldn't reliably invert from left back into midfield in the first half at all. And it's here where Arsenal really need that second phase presence to alleviate that responsibility. And of course, as we know, as I've covered at length on this channel, if you want to know what type of a player Kai Havertz is, what he can do, what he can't do, you just have to watch my videos. We know Havertz can't do that. And like I said, this is the deepest he's ever played in an Arsenal shirt. But this wasn't the plan, as we saw in the second half, where Zinchenko could invert, as I'm going to get onto in just a little bit. And that second phase presence, most importantly, would make playing out of the back much, much easier. The rotations would become much more fluid, especially when connections and relationships have cohered, and mix this with sort of the technical advancement of Arsenal in these areas, the outlets that they have up front, they're relentless runners. This is why I'm sort of saying Arsenal are performing at around 65% of their level. They need that extra ball magnet to release the dependency off Declan Rice or Zinchenko then in higher areas when he can invert. And this was why a change was on the cards of Jorginho coming in that number 6 and Rice in the left-hand side in number 8. But I think fitness in these big space games that you often play in transitional sides like Manchester United, who can break so forcibly, it might be an indicator of Jorginho's fitness not being totally trusted now and only being able to be that controller at the end of games. I'm not saying that's what's happened, but that certainly could be something to look out for now when we consider Arsenal and their depth in midfield, what it actually is. Unfortunately now we can't do our closest representation of what the Partey-Xhaka dynamic would have been last season, because that would be Partey and Declan Rice, and of course Thomas Partey looks to be out for a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks. But like I said, the structure is very good, as it always has been under Arteta. We always have 5 attacking in the last line, regardless. For example, for Arsenal's first goal, that instant reply to Rashford's, Zinchenko recognised this time that he drifted higher in the attack as a wide 5th man, allowing Martinelli to move inside into that inside left channel, and that was where the goal came. And I think the late runs into the box from Havertz or here Martin Ødegaard are going to characterise that sort of double shadow striker role, or whichever interior is the more advanced one in this Arsenal side. And the left-hand side dynamics were instantly better, unsurprisingly, with Zinchenko coming back into the team. That natural left-footedness facilitates progression of the ball so much easier. He's that abundant passer to connect the phases. And I think his appreciation of space makes us look so much more fluid and dangerous, just as a flaw. But let's move into the second half now, where it was a tight first half, a cagey affair if you want, but Arsenal's tactical and qualitative ascendancy, I think, took over more, and this was maybe quite inevitable. United were still in the game, but the probabilities ultimately had shifted, and that's why Arsenal ran out 3-1 winners in the end. So let's talk about that now. Like last year at the Emirates and Arsenal's 3-2 win over Manchester United, it was a very tight first half. United, of course, at their best early on in the game, aggressive in their press, where their transitional threats are also fresh. But then as that overload, Arsenal's overload in their build-up shows, because United, under Ten Hag, only press mainly with 4 attackers up front. And also Arsenal's superior depth, that really turns the screw for Arsenal in the second halves. And in a way, it forces them to grow into confidence, which is something they're lacking at the moment. And inevitably, I think the quality did come through for Arsenal. Zinchenko could suddenly invert more, pushing Havertz into his intended place in between the lines straight away. And that was, of course, where the penalty came from. Because United, although they tried, they found it difficult to get onto the ball. And with that overload that Arsenal had as well in the last line, whether it was a 5 against 4 in United's 4-2-3-1 compact low block, or in the final sort of 15-20 minutes in that 6 versus 5 shape, that sustained possession that Arsenal's superiority in that sense can give them means they can sustain pressure through Rice, whether that's switching of passes, which is something we haven't had at the base of our midfield, really under Arteta as of yet, or playing passes against the momentum of the block, which is a really underrated part of breaking down a system. And the structure just proved to be slightly too good for United in the end, whether it was a 3-1-6 for Arsenal with Tomiyasu or Zinchenko promoting into that half space, or a 2-2-6 with White overlapping on the outside. And I think this level of pressure is difficult for anyone to keep out, and then compound that with the injuries that United have, with Evans forced on, with Maguire as a centre-back pairing, them in their mini-crisis, it was always going to be difficult. And yeah, the technical security for Arsenal, of course they have more chance. And although Rasmus Højlund made Arsenal think two ways when he came on, although he did well, I think it's been underrated how well Gabriel did in the battle to win quite a few of his duels against him as well. And dealing with this threat is a necessity if you can sustain pressure. Of course, United, with these outlets, looking how to attack very quickly on the break. This means the ball is turned over very quickly. Arsenal can sustain pressure. When they lose it, the structure is so good. All the key zones are occupied so they can counter-press efficiently. So, although not dominant for Arsenal, because it definitely wasn't dominant, as United disrupted their initial press, Zinchenko wasn't always able to invert reliably, it was a definitely deserved win, in my opinion, for Arsenal. Especially when we talk about sort of the chances, the Havertz and Saka chances that they missed. Of course, you invite then the pressure from Manchester United, a team that have been so good on the transition, with players of abundant quality in sort of those killer moments. And then when you look at the territorial dominance, the field tilt, Arsenal's 42 touches to 19 in the opposition's box, the 168 final third passes to just 47 for Manchester United. This shows with that second phase presence, that connector, it could have been much more comfortable, but because Arsenal didn't have that, it was made harder. I mean, Opta had Arsenal at 1.8 expected goals before that late onslaught in added time. So I think, as whole, as I would sum up Arsenal, they do have that inevitability of scoring now within them, where you watch them and there's that uncontrollable force that the ball's going to hit the back of the net at some point. They certainly have that, but what they don't have in comparison to Manchester City is that same sort of sinking feeling that you can transmit to the opposition side, that sinking feeling that they cannot score and cannot break you down. There's still those moments, as Garnacho almost proved against Arsenal, that Arsenal as a side need to fix. There was also some nice cameos, again from Fabio Vieira and Reece Nelson, Tomiyasu as well. And I want to do some individual player analysis like this, and like has been requested from some of you guys. So I'm going to have some of those coming up. But I'm going to move on to one of the final parts of the video now. And that's why Arsenal, in my opinion, are operating, and this is quite a specific number, at about 65% of the level they are capable of within them. So why is that? And lots of this come off the back of my discussions previously, prior on the channel. Arsenal, in a way, mixing between two approaches where it's all trying to go through Rice and tightening that more slower, methodical, conservative use of the football. And this goes against the setup, the actual players and the setup used in the first 3 games, if you will. Not as much the Manchester United game, but the first 3 games practiced for those big space UCL ties, those transitional affairs. Also playing at times with 2 shadow strikers, potentially to help sort of the connections on the pitch cohere, that are taking more time, and this will be harder and is made harder when injuries are afoot, and there's a hesitancy to use a proper second phase player as a result of these aforementioned reasons. Zinchenko and Jesus, 2 fundamental players, are still chasing 90-minute fitness. I mean, you saw when Jesus comes on, I've always said I don't feel we need to purchase any Saka backup in the transfer window, because Jesus he can be as good as any winger on the planet. He can do that role across the front line, every single position, as well as anyone. And you saw, as soon as he comes on, how dangerous he is from the right side. I don't have to go into it in more detail. Just from a tactical point of view, it was a nice move to see him move about and be as fluid as we know he can be, because Dalot was lined up on that left-hand side, not just because Manchester United have a want at the moment of left-backs, but his right-footedness complements, in terms of Manchester United's favour, Saka's left-footedness. So Jesus' own right-foot dominance nicely counteracted that. But of course, Gabby is so fluid either side. He can create overloads. That chance creation is sort of magnetic to his qualities on the football pitch. But most importantly, of why Arsenal are at 65%, is that the average age of the team, as represents the whole squad, the average age, the starting 11 and the 18 yesterday was 24.4 years old. And the comments, thank you. You keep reminding me about this. We can never, ever forget or ignore what such a young team is on the brink of being capable of doing. So, of course, emotion can come into it. Confidence can take hits, because we do need more arrogance. But also, that comes from evidence on pitch. That comes from proof of having a well-drilled, oiled machine like Pep Guardiola's Manchester City. So these facets are inevitable, and also what makes Arsenal Arsenal. And the question is, can Arsenal stay with the pace of Manchester City until these issues are sorted? Maybe sort of try and get to January. The international break has probably come at a good time now for Arsenal. And then hopefully we can see, like I've said, allow Arsenal to click and see a more fully functioning Arsenal. Because at the moment, not just for things I've explicated in this video, but for previous videos, we are just about second fiddle to Manchester City. And hoping, as I've said, that click in the later season will make us go bang. Because it will come. And even when we're below par, in these first 4 games, the underlying numbers are so rooted heavily in our favour each time. But that's enough for Arsenal. I just want to quickly finish on Manchester United. But first, I want to talk about a couple of things for them that we should not take for granted in their improvement, because when Ten Hag came into Manchester United, it wasn't a settled environment, and he needs to show that he's good dealing with these intangible aspects that come with such a big club. We're talking about a cultural overhaul, and I know that sort of phrase, if you want, gets chucked about a long time, but it separates sort of elite managers from elite coaches, if that makes sense. And it's that control of every sort of fundament and facet of the whole club. And this isn't just off the back of Jadon Sancho. Ten Hag probably still needs to, let's be honest, he still needs to get hold of that at Manchester United. I think on the pitch, their box defending certainly still needs work, but that's for sort of those issues are for another video. Of course, Amrabat and Højlund will give them more control. Højlund acting as that outball for man-to-man presses that have been causing them issues, even in a behind closed doors game against Vincent Kompany's Burnley, where they lost. Burnley, again, another side, man-man press. So I think let's judge Manchester United when they have a full squad, because it is a mini crisis that they're in at the moment in terms of injuries, availability and depth. But it will be on Erik Ten Hag to get it right when the time comes. But there's lots of moving parts for them. There's also moving parts for Arsenal and for other teams that will become clearer as the season goes by. So there's still a lot to talk about, a lot to decide. I've got a lot of things on my mind that I want to discuss and deliberate with you guys. As always, get in the comments. I'll be down there and discussing with you whatever you think, whatever, even if it's not about the Arsenal-Manchester United game. Get in the comments. Let me know what you think about anything. I'll get chatting with you. But that's all from me. I only ask at the end of the video to for you to like, comment, subscribe, share, whatever, because hopefully that means you found it really informative. But that is all from me. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye for now.